I have been inspired once again, and this time by an RPG horror story. Not one that you have seen, but one that will be placed in next week's video. This story involves a dungeon master and a group of players who have different wants for this game. They have two different styles. The players established their style of playing, and the DM established his style of playing, and those styles, they are different. And it ended up causing friction in the game. Now, I know, who could have foreseen that? But of course, that story had a bunch of other stuff because it's an RPG horror story. And of course, we need more drama than just difference of playstyle. However, difference of playstyle is something that comes up a lot in both these stories and in D&D in general. And often, people think the solution is to just make it work. This DM and these players, if we move aside all of the other stuff that story entails, move that all aside, just focus on the difference of playstyle. If that was the only issue, and they tried to just make it work as a group, I don't think it would have worked out. Now, of course, people can adapt. People can change their playstyle and adapt to a new playstyle, but that's not always what's going to happen. And trying to force a game to work, I think is actually a major problem in a lot of D&D groups, not a solution. So let's talk about my actual solution to this problem and what we can do about it. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, you've heard my pitch. What am I talking about? Well, I am talking about walking away from a D&D group. Now, that sounds really bad. I don't want to leave this group, and I understand. You do not need to leave a D&D group every single time something goes wrong. That is not the solution every time. However, what I am saying is that sometimes differences in playstyle simply cannot be rectified, and the solution for everyone at the table is to simply leave the group and find another table that better suits your playstyle. This is something that I see a lot, and it's something that I see usually get talked down upon. People treat this as if you're like a coward who left the group and now you're disgraced forevermore. But that is, in my opinion, a freaking terrible way to frame this. I think that it is a really good thing if you simply cannot rectify differences in playstyle to leave a group. Now, of course, I keep on saying this difference of playstyle thing. What do I mean? Well, very often, we find groups that simply don't get along. Not because anyone's doing anything wrong, but just because people play this game differently. Dungeons & Dragons and all tabletop RPGs are very unique in the sense that they are incredibly subjective. Matt Colville made a great video called The Problem with Talking About D&D, or something along those lines. And in that video, he focused on the fact that every D&D group plays this game drastically differently, and your perspective on Dungeons & Dragons will vary greatly depending on what group you play in. Even small things, seemingly small things, like the amount of players in your group, 3 players, 5 players, what have you, will drastically change your perspective on how this game is run. And that means that when we're talking about D&D, giving advice, like in this video, it can be kind of awkward, because like, how do I know what group you're playing in? I try to give general advice. My solution is I give general advice. You can use it or you can choose not to use it. Simple as that. None of my advice is like set in stone, except for the stuff about like being nice to other people. I feel like you should always do that, no matter how many people are in your group or what playstyle you're playing in. You should always be nice. But aside from like obvious stuff like that, in terms of playstyle and advice, you can take it or you can leave it. It's up to you. But yeah, anyway, the point is that sometimes D&D groups simply have different style. In the RPG horror story I mentioned, the DM and the players, the whole group, had a difference in expectation for what they wanted out of the game. They established their expectations, they said what they wanted, and then they just assumed that it would work out, even though there were differences. Now, can differences be reconciled? Of course they can. This is incredibly common, I'd argue. You can absolutely reconcile differences in playstyle. For example, in my first ever D&D game, I had a group running Curse of Strahd. I didn't talk about this. I know it ended up being an RPG horror story and a video in itself that I made for 10,000 subscribers. But I didn't talk about this because it wasn't really a big deal. I expected a super serious tone for my D&D game. I had just wrapped up Dice Camera Action. I had just wrapped up the Briarwoods arc in Critical Role. And while both of those campaigns had tons of jokes, they had a lot of serious moments. But my game, it was not like that. It was funny. It was different. It was not what I expected. And I ended up reconciling that. I was having fun. Yeah, it wasn't what I expected, but I was having a good time with the comedic tone of the game. And I ended up just sticking with the group, and we continued on, and well, the game ended up falling apart for other reasons, but the tone was not one of them. We had a good time, even if it wasn't what I expected. Differences can be reconciled, but sometimes people don't want to reconcile those differences, and I think that's okay. You're not being selfish because you don't want to play D&D in a style that you don't like. Your style is perfectly valid, and sticking to that style is perfectly valid, as long as you don't try to force somebody else to play in that same style. For example, I do not like running evil campaigns. That's not what I want to run as a dungeon master. I don't have fun writing those kind of narratives for my players. So if a player comes in and says, hey, I want to run an evil character, I will say, sorry, I don't do that here. And that's perfectly okay. I will recommend that player either tries to make a good character instead or a neutral character instead, or that player find a different group that will be happy to run an evil campaign or a campaign for an evil character. I think that's perfectly okay. Sometimes the differences just exist. You need to have fun in Dungeons & Dragons. And if you're playing in a way that makes you not have fun, you have found one of the only ways to play Dungeons & Dragons wrong. You should be having fun in this game. It is a game after all. And again, trying to force it to work, trying to make it work, even if players don't want to play in the style that you want, that's going to make everyone miserable. Everyone has their own desire for this game, and that is okay. It's okay for groups to have differences. And I think we as a community need to be better at accepting that. Very often, we will see stories where there are differences of playstyle and either say one of two things. A lot of people either say, oh, well, you should try to make it work, or that group is bad because they wanted that playstyle. Neither of these is true at all, but it's a sentiment I see so often, it almost scares me. I see so often people saying, oh my god, that group wanted silly role-playing, or that group wanted hardcore dungeon crawling. How terrible. They should have played in your style. No, that is not the message at all. That's not the point in any way. The problem isn't that somebody wants to play D&D in a different way. You want to play D&D with roleplay, heavy elements, lots of voice acting, silly accents, all that. That's not a problem. You want to play D&D as a hardcore dungeon crawler? That's not a problem. Whatever way you want to play D&D is perfectly valid. However, you need to make sure everyone at the table wants that. Because, again, like I said, the only way to play D&D wrong is if somebody isn't having fun. This is a game, after all. Forcing games to work only leads to disaster. Talking about your game and trying to figure out what you can do to reconcile your differences, that's going to work out. But it has to be an open discussion. You shouldn't go into it expecting, all right, I'm going to make this DM run a hardcore dungeon crawler. That's what's going to happen. Because that's not going to happen. I'm going to tell you that right now. If a dungeon master goes to their players and says, I'm going to make my players roleplay more. That's probably, nope, not going to happen. You can't make your players or make your dungeon master do anything. And people aren't going to just shift to a completely different play style in a night. It'll take some getting used to. And a lot of players simply aren't going to want that. Again, if somebody came up to me and said, I'm going to make you run evil characters, nope, not going to happen. Not going to happen at all. It's not going to work out for you. And it's going to make everyone at the table not have fun if I'm running a game that I'm not going to enjoy. It matters for everybody at the table. So what should you do? I think you should talk to your dungeon master. Talk about how you can come to a compromise that works out for everybody. If you want more role-playing, maybe ask the dungeon master, hey, can you talk in character more as the NPCs? I think the other players and I would really appreciate that. If you want more intense encounters, hey Dungeon Master, can you turn up the heat in these encounters a little bit? Create more interesting mechanics. Here, can I help you to create more interesting mechanics for the fights? I think it would make the game more engaging. And if the Dungeon Master doesn't want to do that, or your players don't want to do that, then sometimes the best solution is to simply find another Dungeon Master. Find different players who are going to want that for the game. Ideally, you're going to have this conversation early. I can't imagine differences in playstyle this drastic are going to come out like a year into the campaign. You should have these conversations early. And that's another thing. Make sure to have these conversations early. If you're not having fun for any reason, whatever it is, talk to your dungeon master. Talk to your players if you are the dungeon master. Just talk to somebody. Make sure that the people at your table know. Because otherwise, there's nothing anyone can do about it, and it's just going to fester on and on and on until the problem becomes irreversible. Alright, now that is my, I'm going to be honest, rant about this subject. I'm sorry if this video was a bit more ranty. It is something that's near and dear to my heart and something I really, really believe in. This game is so diverse and awesome with so many different people who play in so many different ways. And I think we as a community need to be better at realizing that some people are going to play some games and some people are going to play other games, and that is okay. Dungeons & Dragons, a big part of it is finding the group that works for you, not forcing the group to make them work under you, right? So yeah, that is my little discussion on that. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. I really hope, even though this video was a bit ranty, I hope you did learn something from it, and I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did really enjoy it and want to see more of my content, then please do check out my RPG horror story series. We're crawling towards 150 episodes. You can check that out in the cards. And if you really enjoyed that, then you can subscribe to Crispy's Tavern while you're there. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment making it work. So let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's just like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.